Greetings everyone, it's your Peacekeeper, and we are going to go ahead and get started on our How to Play series for the Royal Navy battleships. And with the start of every series, I like to cover very briefly commander skills, because that is an important discussion that we need to have, and if we have it in its own separate video, that tends to make my other videos not any longer than they already are, because there's so many different ways to build it. With this video means we have to launch this with my favorite caveat ever, which is these suggested builds are nothing more than suggestions, or as I like to phrase it more accurately, these are kind of a foundation on which you can build upon depending upon your personal preferences and how you play ships. Now, this is just how I set up these ships, these captains for these ships more specifically. It is by no means hard and fast or the only ways to put these ships together. You can blend any number of skills that you could possibly want, and with the captain skill rework that happened 6 months ago, we basically got the ability to spec these ships in so many very different ways. There's no way I can cover them all in this one video. So I'm going to talk about 3 builds that I think are probably going to be the 3 most common captain skills builds. And those are going to be what I'm going to call an aircraft build, a survivability or zombie build, as some people like to call it, and a more balanced build. Of course, my favorite of those is going to be the balanced build. I tend to prefer those over other builds. And the only other thing I have to say before we actually dive into these captain skills is that if for whatever reason there was a ship that uses different captain skills, I will try and address that in the video. Haven't run into one yet so far, but not very far in the line to make that judgment. So let's go look at Mr. Moore's captain skills here, and we'll start talking about the different builds. Now, one thing that I would like to address right off the bat is there's going to be some disagreement on certain aspects of these builds. And like I said, this is intended to be kind of a foundation for you to build your own captain upon, just to give you some ideas, if you will, on where you can go with your own captain based upon what the various other ship, captains and other shipmates would be using. So these are by no means hard and fast, but one of the more common disagreements that I've had in other videos is preventative maintenance versus priority target versus expert loader versus incoming fire alert. And at tier 1, there are so many good tier 1 skills, it's really hard to really talk about one by itself. But in case you don't know, priority target, when you get detected, it will tell you how many ships, with a number up by the detected symbol, how many ships are targeting you actively at that time. It's a very powerful skill. However, when you've played enough battles in this game, it almost becomes second nature to intuitively know that if you're detected, you have a pretty good idea of where all the shots are coming from. It's rare to get surprised by other shots, and thus priority target actually becomes less of a necessary skill. That's not to say it's not a good skill for somebody to take, so if you're somebody who needs that information, by all means, please take it. You will see in none of the builds that I have here, I don't have priority target listed. That doesn't mean that you can't take it. Just understand that some of the things I discuss in this video are going to be, focused around the fact that I'm running a different tier 1 skill. Expert loader, I have that mentioned here because the Royal Navy battleships do excel at both HE and AP, and with that comes options, and options are good. Expert loader, is going to reduce your reload time when a shell is fully loaded. So if you have HE loaded into the guns and they're ready to fire, if you want to change to AP, it will cut the reload time in half. The other one here is going to be incoming fire alert, which I pretty much universally hate. Basically, this will tell you if a ship is shooting at you. And this says the shell's time to target is more than 6 seconds, so basically long-range fire only. In terms of usefulness, not really a fan. The only other tier 1 skill that will get mentioned frequently is Direction Center for catapult aircraft. And quite honestly, this skill on battleships is, I'm going to say it, it's garbage. The reason why I say that is because your aircraft aren't in the air long enough to actually complete full revolutions, and they have a tendency to cycle in the same direction, which makes this skill basically useless for its intended purpose, which is well, I guess outside of its intended purpose, which is what I use my scouting aircraft for, my fighter aircraft for, is for detection of torpedoes. There are other skills that can help you with that, but with all these builds, you're going to see I'm running preventative maintenance, and I'll explain that as we get a little bit closer. So, this first build that I want to talk about is going to be the anti-aircraft build, and there's somebody rolling their eyes somewhere, oh my goodness, why would we ever run an AA build? Well, especially at the lower tiers, carriers are still quite prevalent in this game, and with that, some people just don't like carriers and would like to do everything in their power to get rid of their influence on their gameplay. And the Royal Navy battleships actually have pretty decent AA from what I've seen so far. I mean, at the lower tiers, it's not quite up to the German par. It's pretty comparable, at least up through the Orion, which admittedly is only where I'm at. It seems like it's pretty solid, somewhere around the same range as the US battleships at this tier, which are less than their German counterparts because reasons. Anyway, that's a different discussion for a different time. But this build is going to start off with preventative maintenance, and there's somebody going, well, I know where you're going with this. That 30% reduction in the incapacitation of modules is nice, but it doesn't apply to AA. And you would be correct. This does not apply to your anti-aircraft guns or secondary guns. It only applies to your main battery, your engines, and your rudder. Now, those three things are, well, one of those things, they're all covered by upgrades, but only one of them is covered by an upgrade that you get right from the get-go. The reasons why I run preventative maintenance is so that on a ship, if we go here to the modules, you can see here that we can change main armaments mod 1 on the ship, which is, a 20% reduction in your main battery being incapacitated, increase in hit points, and 20% reduction in main battery repair time. We can change that to auxiliary armaments mod 1, which is going to double the hit point pool of both our anti-aircraft guns and secondary guns. Preventative maintenance takes over main armaments mod 1's job and allows us to run auxiliary armaments mod 1. So that's why I'm running preventative maintenance on this captain. In the second slot, I'm taking expert marksman. It doesn't matter how fast a battleship's guns turn, they never turn fast enough, so this is going to increase the traverse speed by 0.7 degrees a second, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a couple seconds off your 180 degree turn time, and that can sometimes make the difference. In the third slot, I am running Superintendent, and this is going to give you extra heals. Later on, if there's any other consumables that you get, it'll give you an extra one like your fighter, and yes, 5 seems ridiculous, but I will be the first person to tell you that, especially on these lower tier ships, I'm using all of them. So, Superintendent is definitely useful in that regard. It gives you one additional charge on your limited consumables, like the repair party consumable. From there, I'm running Advanced Firing Training, which adds 20% to the firing range of your anti-aircraft guns. It also increases the firing range of your secondaries by 20%, and since none of our battleships have guns smaller, main battery guns smaller than 139 millimeters, doesn't do anything else aside from increasing your secondary and AA firing range by 20%. From there, obviously going to take manual fire control for AA, any gun with a caliber above 85 millimeters, which is the vast majority of the dual-purpose gun mounts on Royal Navy battleships. That is going to increase their damage per second by 100%. So all of those 4-inch gun batteries at the mid-tiers and the 5-inch gun batteries at the high tiers, those dual-purpose gun mounts, going to double their DPS when you control-click on a target. So if you select an aircraft group, your dual-purpose gun mounts are going to do twice as much damage as they would normally. That's very powerful and a requirement for an anti-aircraft build. From there, the next obvious one is going to be basic firing training, and this is going to increase the DPS of your anti-aircraft by 20%, so 20% more damage to all of your anti-aircraft suite. And much like the US battleships, the higher tier Royal Navy battleships, all of their AA is concentrated in their mid-range guns. Not a whole lot in the long-range stuff like the Germans, it's all in the mid-ranges, so 20% to these very large mid-range gun numbers means a lot of DPS increase. and that's extremely powerful. From there, you know, a number of tier 2 skills that you could pick, but I'm personally going to choose Adrenaline Rush, which, you know, this is more for your offensive capabilities than it is anything, but it's going to decrease the reload time. It says of all types of armament. I'm not sure if this applies to anti-aircraft. Probably not. It decreases the reload time of all your armament by 0.2% for every 1% of your hit point loss. So again, that's more focused on the main battery. Secondaries have limited use on the Royal Navy battleships, but it does impact them as well, if I remember correctly. So this next build is going to be what I would consider the Survivability Build, or Zombie Build. This is the, I hate taking damage, I want to minimize how much damage I take from sources like flooding or fire, and in this build you kind of give up a little bit in anti-aircraft, but you've got a high enough base AA rating that it's usually not too big of an issue. This build is going to again start off with Preventative Maintenance, although in this build you could run Main Armaments Mod 1. Again, I personally would rather have the ability to, you know, run Auxiliary Armaments Mod 1 to buff my anti-aircraft. That's just my personal opinion on that, but also on this would be another good candidate for Priority Target if you need Priority Target. So that would be a reason to take Priority Target at this. Either of those two would be beneficial to you. I guess you could run Incoming Fire Alert if you really want to, but again, I personally don't think that skill is terribly useful compared to other Tier 1 skills at this tier. From there, it's going to go to Expert Marksman for the exact same reasons as before. We really don't need, you know, to have slow turrets. That's part of survivability. Getting guns on targets and removing enemies that are shooting at you from the game obviously helps you stay alive longer. Seems a little convoluted, but trust me, it works. From there, Superintendent for the extra heal and extra fighter later on. From there, Concealment Expert, which is going to decrease the detection range of your battleship by 14%. That's a fairly large drop in your concealment range and can really make the difference when you're disengaging from enemy ships. And I can't stress that enough. Concealment is the best form of survivability. If you're not being spotted, it's very difficult for them to shoot and hit you. From there, we're going to make our way over to Fire Prevention, and you could swap Concealment Expert or Fire Prevention in this. No real priority on this. But that's going to reduce your chance of being started on fire by 10%, but more importantly, it's going to reduce the number of fire sources on a ship from 4 to 3. So normally you have one at the bow, one at the front of your superstructure, one at the back of your superstructure, and one at the stern of the ship. This takes your middle two, so your superstructure fire, and combines them into one. These are the two most common places that a ship will get started on fire, and by combining them, it does make a substantial difference in the amount of damage you take from fires, because you no longer have the two easiest sources of fire to get. That means any other HE shells that hit have to either have enough splash on them to start the bow or stern on fire, or they actually have to physically hit the bow and stern of the ship. So by running Fire Prevention, less chances of getting started on fire in the middle section. I mean, you get less overall chance of starting on fire, but your chances of getting more than 2 fires is drastically reduced, and it maxes out then at 3. From there, you can run either Basics of Survivability, which is here. That's going to be 15% time to the reduction to the time of repairing, damaged modules, so your main battery, your engines, or rudder. And it's going to decrease the time it takes to repair fires and decrease the time it takes to repair floods, again by 15%. Very powerful skill there. Used to be the de facto standard when it was a tier 1 skill. Or you could choose Vigilance, which is all the way over here. This is going to increase the detection range of torpedoes by 25%. That is a fairly large buff to detecting, torpedoes. The obvious survivability here is if you spot them further out, you have more time to react to them and less likelihood of running into them. From there, you can jump down to either High Alert, which is going to reduce the reload time of your damage control party consumable. That's that instant repair of fires and flooding or incapacitated modules. It's going to reduce the reload time of that by 10%. Or you can run Jack of all trades, which reduces the time of all of your mounted consumables by 5%. So you're getting your damage control party faster, you're getting your repair party, which is repairing hit points, 5% faster, or you're launching aircraft 5% faster, etc. So those are kind of my ideas for the survivability build. Again, nothing set in stone and hard and fast. Now, what I call the more balanced build is going to give you a fairly healthy mix of everything. It's going to start off again with Preventative Maintenance. It's going to jump up to Expert Marksman. Goes from Expert Marksman to Superintendent, then to Concealment Expert. So you can see the Tier 1 through 4 is the same as the Survivability. Well, sorry, is the same as... Well, I guess it's not the same as any of them, because we've kind of changed things. But anyway... starting off with Preventative Maintenance, then Expert Marksman, then Superintendent, then Concealment Expert. And then we'll jump over to Advanced Firing Training, primarily for the increase in your anti-aircraft defense firing range. Then to Basic Firing Training for the increase in AA damage per second. And then to Adrenaline Rush for the faster reload time, the more damage you take. And if this build sounds familiar to some of you guys that have been watching my series on the US battleships, there's a reason. That build works extremely well for the US battleships, and it should be no surprise that aside from the high explosive differences between the two, the fire chance and all that, US battleships and Royal Navy battleships, at least from my experience, play very similarly in that, you know, when it comes to AA, they have very similar AA configurations where their AA is primarily focused in the mid-range AA, so those 40mm Bofors for the US. The Royal Navy has 40mm guns. They do have Bofors as well. They've got some other mid-range stuff thrown in there as a mix. Basically, your anti-aircraft is the same. Your detection ranges are pretty comparable as well. They're on the better than worse side, so they're better than most nations are, and that especially at the high tiers where these ships get trollishly invisible, like 11k levels of trollishly invisible. So concealment is really powerful on these ships. And then, you know, you can take advantage of your healing abilities and your repair abilities by, you know, having another repair party consumable, which is just super nice. So those are kind of my builds that I have in my mind. You know, I'm obviously going to be running the balanced build because I think it's a perfect fit for these ships. What you choose, again, these are not hard and fast. If you want to run a different build, by all means. And speaking of different builds, if you have a different suggestion for a build, throw it down in the comments. I'm sure other people would love to know what builds other people's are running and what your guys' thoughts are on my builds. So with that, I'm your Peacekeeper. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for watching.